Hey, I'm Rachel,
And I'm Amanda, and this is Beyond a Ballot.
powered by DoorDash.
Today, we're joined by someone who's been on the front lines of Canadian politics for more than 2 decades, a journalist who knows the players, the pressure, and the pulse of the nation's capital. David Cochrane is the host of CBC's Power and Politics. This is the mashup you've been waiting for because both Rachel and I have been panelists on that show for many years. He has a sharp political instinct, clear storytelling, and a knack for breaking down the complex into the relatable. We're so thrilled to have him here. It's really fun for us to be able to interview the interviewer, as they say. He's going to help us unpack the latest developments, including that much talked about Trump-Carney meeting. What are all these tariffs about and what it means for Canada's economic and political landscape? David, welcome to the show.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining us. I have lived for this day where I finally get to ask you questions instead of the reverse. So I'm going to put to you a question that you asked me on your show the other night, which is the Trump-Carney meeting, up or down, now that we've had a couple of days of breathing room? What do you think?
Kind of both, and maybe a little bit sideways, and then also spinning in a circle. Look, it's a difficult thing to assess because what happens in public is important, but I don't know how substantive it is. Like I was in the Oval Office in May when they had the first meeting there in Washington, and like you're all very worried because this was after Zelensky had been in there, and you didn't know how this was going to go.
Right.
It was friendly, it was cordial. They seem to get along. Mark Carney seems to command the respect of the President of the United States. And then within a month, steel and aluminum tariffs doubled. Right? So they have this meeting, and it's even more friendly. Donald Trump says we're going to leave happy. It's going to be great. Dom LeBlanc speaks on the roof of the Canadian embassy and says, it was positive, it was constructive, it was detailed, and we've been given direction to work on steel and aluminum and energy, which was an interesting revelation. But then while Dom LeBlanc stays in Washington to advance the conversations, Howard Lutnick beams into the Eurasia Canada-USA Summit in Toronto and says, you're going to lose. Just accept it. If you're judging things by where they are now versus where they're going to be, Canada's going to be unhappy. We're going to assemble all the cars. You need to figure out what you're going to do instead. So how do you interpret that? Right? It is. If it's not the president saying it, you kind of discount it because he's the only person who makes the decisions in that administration, is what they tell you. But are they actually tangibly making progress? I cannot tell. It's not getting dramatically worse in these encounters. Those steel and aluminum, heavy-duty trucks, cabinets, extra lumber tariffs, it's gone in the wrong direction. So what value is a friendly spray, as they call this, when the leaders are there and the media is allowed in, if the underlying economic conditions are actually deteriorating? So I feel like it's a snow globe where it gets shaken up and looks dramatically different, but then it settles back down to what it was. And until there's a permanent change, it's sideways.
So for people who are watching and it felt like it was positively chummy, but they didn't walk away with a concrete deal, was there an expectation in your mind that they were going to walk away with a concrete deal?
No, not on my mind. I was a bit of an outlier on some of the reporting, right? Like, people had sources saying there's an expectation of relief on steel tariffs and aluminum tariffs. And the language I was hearing was there is the potential for movement, right? And that is not an expectation of relief. The potential for movement is, okay, Trump said, go work on a deal on steel and aluminum tariffs. That's movement. That's not relief. That's not a conclusion. So I don't know who everyone else was talking to. I know who I talked to, and they were hyper cautious. They were like, do not get out over your skis. The president invited us, Carney and Trump, they spoke at the UN General Assembly in New York a few weeks back. And the president said, you should come down. And what are you going to do, right? You're the prime minister of Canada. You don't want to snub the guy. You don't want to antagonize the guy. That leader-to-leader relationship is critical, right? It is absolutely critical in any administration, but doubly so in this administration. So people applied a lot of conventional political analysis to it, that they wouldn't go there unless they had something to announce. I'm like, well, maybe, but I think you kind of have to, you got to be like a doctor here and take the Hippocratic Oath approach that, first of all, do no harm.
Right.
And saying no to an invitation to the White House from this president is harm. And self-harm is not something Canada can engage in this perilous economic moment. So you take every opportunity you have to get into the room with him, make your case, make your pitch, introduce things like resurrecting Keystone XL, which was the energy thing that was talked about there, and try to move the ball. So I don't know if the people right at the center of the negotiations had an expectation for meaningful progress. Maybe some of the people on the edges did. And, they may have got a little bit over their skis in terms of, trying to explain to people what they thought was going to happen here.
I want to zoom out a little bit and talk to the person that's listening to us that doesn't really know what the context of this meeting was this week. I mean, we know that Canada and the United States have had a very turbulent alternate relationship over the last few months.
Yeah.
But what is the context of, you said, Carney was invited to go down, but from the economic and domestic standpoint, as a reporter, as a journalist in Canada, how would you frame the news this week?
Well, I mean, zoom back, I guess, to the 10,000 feet level here. The Canada-U.S. trading relationship is the most successful economic partnership in the history of the world. That and the European Union Common Market,
Exactly.
right? I don't know of anything else you could look at and say, this is how capitalism is supposed to work, because it has generally led to a massive expansion of wealth on both sides of the border. Not without its downsides, but, in the aggregate. Trump doesn't like it. He's decided to disrupt it. And, this $3 billion, I think, is the number of trade back and forth every single day across the Canada-U.S. border.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's all being upended. And sort of the conclusion I came to this week after listening to the president speak in the Oval Office, sort of in the prologue to the one-on-one private meeting, is he talks about countries as competitors. He talks about them as customers. He talks about them as suppliers. He never talks about them as partners. And the Canada-U.S. intertanglement, politically, economically, and culturally, it's based around the notion of a partnership. And that means sometimes you give up any partnership, you take a little bit less than the maximum that you could exert in your leverage, because you value the relationship and the stability and the longevity and kind of the whole global order that has existed since the end of the Second World War. A lot of it designed at the insistence of the United States. It works in large part because the most powerful country in the history of the world has exercised a level of restraint and a commitment of shared values. And that's just not there anymore. So, Trump kind of sees, trade deficits not as, the natural flow of free trading partners. He kind of sees it as a profit and loss column. And he doesn't view it, the way economists view it. He views it as purely a transactional thing. So he has decided that he wants the U.S. to come out on the winning side of every single trade agreement and arrangement that they have. And when you are a $30 trillion economy, you can throw your weight around. And that's what's happening here. So, there's a bunch of different tariffs out there, but, to break it simply down, there's really what we're dealing with at this moment in time are sectoral tariffs. So specific economic sectors have been hit with tariffs by the president under the fig leaf of it's a threat to American national security. Now, how the Windsor auto manufacturing plants are a threat to the national security of Detroit, I do not know. But this is his argument. I guess economic security is national security. So he's hitting steel, he's hitting auto, he's hitting lumber, he's hitting aluminum, hitting copper, hitting pharmaceuticals eventually, and everything like kitchen cabinets and heavy-duty trucks. And it is killing these industries. Like there's no nice way to say it. Steel and auto are bleeding out, right? They are in real trouble. And I look at these towns, like I've talked to the mayor, Sault Ste. Marie, on the show a bunch of times, Matthew Shoemaker. They're really a one industry town. And the fear is that if the Algoma facility there goes down, because 60% of its market, its product is sent to the U.S., they're a post-industrial town, like the Rust Belt towns in the Midwest U.S. that Trump is worried about. And I remember because I'm old. In the 1990s, when I was in university and high school, the fishery collapsing back home in Newfoundland and Labrador, and these fish plant towns losing their fish plant. And it's the same thing. It's a different industry, but the spiral effect is exactly the same. And so we are 10 months in to a 48-month presidency.
Oh my gosh.
Right?
Yeah.
Right?
Can we
exactly.
hang on?
And,
Can we hang on?
well,
I think that's what everyone's thinking.
Right. I mean, 80,000 jobs have been lost. You know, a lot of them in manufacturing, most of them directly connected to the disruption of this. And we haven't even gotten to the big trade agreement. Like when the prime minister says Canada has the best market access to the United States out of any country in the world, he is 100% right. It is better today than it is for most countries, but it is far, far worse than it was for Canada on January 1, on January 20th, on April 28th, and the first oval office because of these sectoral tariffs. The whole trade agreement comes up for renegotiation and review next year. And my fear as I look at this, as there is this urgent push by Canada, let's get a deal on steel, let's get a deal on auto, let's stop the pain, let's find out what it is so we can adjust, that America just drags this out until we get to the larger trade agreement. Those sectors are weaker, the overall economy is weaker, and their leverage is even stronger at the bargaining table than it is right now as an economy 10 times the size of ours. And a lot of damage gets done.
We've speculated that on the show, and it's scary to hear you confirm that you're thinking that too.
I'm getting more and more pessimistic about where things are going. Like I remember we go to St. John's for Christmas every year, and New Year's Eve having dinner with my friends, and getting into this dark kind of moment where I kind of felt like the next 5 years, this is going back to December 31st, so last year, could be worse than the previous 5 years. And we had a pandemic, and we had October 7th, and we have Ukraine, but there were global institutions that kind of kept the bottom from falling out. And all of that's kind of unraveling in this moment, right? Like we're realigning into economic blocks and political blocks, moving away from reliable partners, everyone getting squeezed between the two great superpowers of the world, the US and China. And the idea of like military alliances and multinational organizations holding, if there's another great stress point, I don't know, right? Because so much of that is dependent on the US, and people are learning they kind of can't depend on the US, at least not the way they have for the last half century.
And I think a lot of people want to know, is this working for Trump and for the US? Are they seeing the fruits of this? Are their economic fortunes changing? What is your sense of how Americans are feeling about these tariffs?
That's a tough one to know. How they're individually feeling, and then there's the data. Look, the world is being segmented into political and ideological tribes by algorithms, right? And everyone's political reality is different, and they believe what they're being fed by what they see on their phones for the most part. And they have a very partisan media ecosystem in the United States. So there's how people feel about the economy, and then there's who people blame for the economy. Right. And that becomes a very different calculation for a lot of people. And I do think America has fundamentally changed over the last 10 to 15 years. Right. Like, America isn't like this because Trump is president. Trump is president because America is like this. And, that's the reality of where that country is. There has been a bit of a buffer in them sort of feeling the pain, because when all the tariff signaling began at the beginning of the year, a lot of manufacturers and businesses stockpiled their inventories to get ahead of the tariff walls. So they had what they needed to do their manufacturing. That's probably going to start running out by the end of this year, certainly by the beginning of next year. There's, to get really kind of like macro nerdy on things, those inventories are getting low. And you've got container ships coming back from the countries like China, where they buy these things, the inputs, that are nearly empty. There's just trade is way down on the raw materials. So they're going to run out of their stash, and they're going to have to start either stop producing things or start passing on the brunt of the tariffs to the American consumers at a scale that they've not seen to this point, right? And that's when they're really going to see it. But the job creation numbers are flatlining or declining. Things are slowing down economically. We're feeling it here. And obviously we're more vulnerable because we're so exposed to what's happening there. But they're moving in a bad direction there economically. And, all of this will start to coincide with the beginning of our trade negotiations and the run up to the midterm elections. But there's just so many things happening in the U.S. each and every day that this just gets overwhelmed, right? Like the National Guard is being deployed to cities to provide security for masked federal agents that are arresting people without warrant, some of whom are being deported to countries from which they are not from. There's all of these things happening at the same time. The Republicans control the White House, the Senate, and the Congress, yet there's a government shutdown that is somehow the Democrats' fault. And the Democrats at the national level are unable to sort of marshal a coherent pushback against it when it seems like there's a clear opposition opportunity to what's going on. So there's this cauldron of chaos all the time in the U.S.
Yeah.
And, that whatever economic pain is being felt, it hasn't coalesced into a clear political, force just yet, though Trump's numbers are dropping and declining and all of these things. And industry is making choices to expand production inside the tariff walls of America, which is what he wanted, right? Because it's a 19th century trade policy pursuing a 20th century industrial policy with a 21st century economy. So, it is... I think the first quarter of 2026, and I know that's a long way to wait if you're an auto worker or a steel worker, that's when you're really going to see some pretty deep scarring on their side of the border. And I think that's kind of what Canada's hoping for, is that their policies in the U.S. will start doing enough damage to the United States that will be the leverage that Canada needs at the bargaining table, because you just can't punch against that kind of weight in this fight.
That's a scary thought, all of that. And
it's grim. Yeah, I mean, it's grim. Like, people complain all the time, why do you cover the U.S. so much? It's like, we live in the suburbs of the Roman Empire. Right. You have to pay attention to the emperor, right? Because it matters, right?
Exactly. I know. And you have such a front seat to history because you've had conversations with so many people that are involved in these negotiations, and so many Americans and Canadians. And I think that you're one of the people in the country that really have your finger on the pulse when it comes to where we are in this moment with these negotiations. So hearing that come from you is it's a little jarring, but the reality is important to know also. But I want to flip to something in my mind more positive, and that is the announcement that we heard once Carney left Washington, that the Keystone XL pipeline had been brought up in those conversations, which we didn't know when I was on your show. I think it was Tuesday night. We still didn't know.
I didn't know either.
Exactly.
No, Rosie found that out at like 10:30 that night, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm driving home actually from the studio, and I was thinking, like, oh my gosh, we didn't get to talk about that. So tell our audience, what is the Keystone XL pipeline? Why are they hearing about this? And what could this mean for Canada? I mean, good or bad?
Well, I'm going to steal a line from Jason Markisoff, who was on the show on Wednesday night. He said, "What's better than one pipeline with no proponent? Two pipelines with no proponent."
Oh my God.
Because the Daniel Smith plan to get to the Pacific Northwest, that is going to create a border war with David Eby.
Yes.
Look, the Keystone XL is this massive pipeline that runs from Alberta all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. It was approved. It is still permitted and approved in Canada. They'd probably have to refresh some of the paperwork, but despite all the pipeline rhetoric, it's not Canada's fault this hasn't happened. It was ready to go. Work had started. Barack Obama killed it. Donald Trump wins. Donald Trump resurrects it. Joe Biden wins. Joe Biden kills it. So there's this snip, snap with Keystone. TC Energy, which was the proponent, has kind of moved on from it. It has spun off a subsidiary called Southbow, which is one of the three energy companies that is advising Daniel Smith on her gambit to get to Prince Rupert. It had said it had moved on from the project at the beginning of this year. It now says it is open to exploring all options to increase the transmission of energy to the United States. What does that mean? I don't know. I don't think we should look at this as, but it is a shift. I would know that. I don't think we should look at this as Mark Carney going in and saying, "Hi, Donald, if you drop all this tariff nonsense, we'll build this pipeline." Right. I think it was held up as an example of, you want to be energy secure, you want to dominate the energy markets. This is an area we can work together. And we can look at, we're kickstarting this, but we've got to find a way to work together. Going back to my point earlier, that partnership is what Canada wants from the U.S. as opposed to competition, customers. I mean, the way Trump views it. So it's on the table in that respect. Now, part of the idea behind the TMX pipeline, which is the one that basically the pipeline that Justin Trudeau bought and built, even though he's apparently anti-pipeline, and the one to Prince Rupert that Danielle Smith wants to do. The purpose of that is to open up new markets, right? To avoid being captured by the U.S. The way it kind of works now with a lot of Alberta oil is they sell high volumes at a discounted price into the United States. It's kind of like being a bulk producer of goods and you only sell to Costco. You make your profit on volume, not on unit price. Getting to the West Coast lets you sell to Target and Walmart as well, right? So it gets you into more spaces at a higher price. So this would boost production in Alberta, which means more royalties, more jobs, more taxes, all of those things for the government of Alberta and for the government of Canada. So there's a clear benefit there. On the GDP side, there is going to be a fight over this on emissions and climate policy inside the Liberal caucus and outside, because you just can't scale it up like this. Even if you decarbonize it, to use that term, on the production end, once you burn the barrel, right? And that's where things go. So I don't know if this is sort of in that golden dome
that was weird.
Category where this is a potential area of cooperation. Right. But we've got to stabilize everything else before we're going to do this, is how I view it from the outside. Because like Golden Dome, I mean, you wonder why would they deepen sort of their military cooperation with the U.S.? Well, like you can move away from them as a supplier in a lot of things, but you can't do that Bugs Bunny meme where you take out the saw, cut Florida off, and it drifts away into the ocean. I mean, we are attached to the U.S. We are on the continent. Russia's over the poles. You just cannot escape the need for a NORAD and other, continental security engagements. So I think this is kind of the pitch that, the central argument that the Canadians have been trying to make to the Americans is that we're both better off when this nonsense isn't happening. We're your number one customer, we're one of your biggest markets, and we are one of your biggest suppliers. We have a lot of direct foreign investment. We have all the critical minerals that you need, Donald. And all of these things are going to be in jeopardy if you persist on this predatory trade policy, because there's no other way to look at it. It's not about tweaking at the margins. It's about fundamentally stripping Canada for parts and moving these things to the United States. And so I think that's where Keystone comes into it, at least at this stage, because there's no proponent. It's not ready to go. There's been a lot of upgrades to other pipelines to fill some of the capacity of energy in East and Keystone were intending to do originally. But, I'm sure it's music to Danielle Smith's ears and Scott Moe's ears. But if it goes beyond the concept phase, it's back to that snow globe, Rachel. It gets shaken up.
Exactly.
But then it just kind of settles back down until Trump does something permanent.
And now a word from our title sponsor, DoorDash. Season 3 of Beyond a Ballot is powered by DoorDash. Just like we go beyond politics, DoorDash goes beyond delivery, investing in people, stories, and communities across Canada. 93% of Dashers agree that dashing provides them with more flexibility compared to other job opportunities. For Nadia, a Cambridge, Ontario-based Dasher, that flexibility means a lot to her as a mother. With a busy family schedule, she values being able to decide when and how much she works. With the ability to choose her own schedule, she has the flexibility to be there for the moments that matter most. For Nadia, dashing gives her the opportunity to balance work and family on her own terms. Her story highlights how Dashers across Canada are finding flexibility that fits their lives.
We heard a lot of elbows up rhetoric for some time. Now the elbows have seemed to come down. We've removed some of the countermeasures, counter tariffs or retaliatory tariffs. There's movement on, the border policy. What is the domestic pressure that Carney is under? Not just to reach the deal, but where is he? He seems to be shifting his approach, his tone on this. Is that because of domestic pressure? And if so, from where?
So I think there's parallel tracks here.
Okay.
I mean, the election was elbows up versus knock it off, right?
Right.
To really be reductive on the two competing approaches. And, there was a different context in the first 4 months of this year. The sovereignty 51st state thing seemed very much alive. Trump brings it up now, but it's more like he's trying to just like yank chains when he does it,
totally.
it is, he still believes it, I'm sure. But I think he's abandoned it as a policy goal, shall we say, he's not trying to unite North America like a game of Risk, so you get 5 armies a turn. But that was very much it. And it was also the crucible of an election campaign where everything gets reduced to like kind of slogans and stark positions and these sorts of things. I kind of view this as an evolving set of circumstances. So the Oval Office meeting in May, that's a transition point, right? They met, they talked. It was Prime Minister. It was cordial. So do you be as aggressive? Or do you need? I remember when this is a deep pull and a bit of a transition, a bit of an aside, but. The White House correspondent dinner in Washington, the president and politicians go, they have dinner with, journalists, and a comedian comes on and roasts everybody. And it was when George W. Bush was president, and he was there, and Stephen Colbert was the moderator.
So good.
And he pointed at Bush and he goes, "This is a man of constant opinions. He never changes a mind. He believes on Tuesday exactly what he believed on Sunday, no matter what happened on Monday." There's been a lot of Mondays, right? There's been a lot of Mondays. True. So right. True. So your understanding and your view needs to change, and your tactics need to change, right? So the counter tariffs, let's use that example. These were put on by the Trudeau government, and they made sense at the time. Hit back hard.
Yeah.
But it was in a time when the belief was the tariffs on Canada were simply leverage to get specific policy actions from Canada on fentanyl and different things that if we met this magical threshold of appeasement, they would go away. Right. I don't think we believe that anymore, right? No. The other thing is Canada did secure the CUSMA carve-out, with the U.S., that if things are compliant with the trade agreement, they're not tariffed. Well, some of our counter tariffs were tariffing things that were CUSMA compliant. This was an irritant at the table, and it was just stopping progress. So in negotiations, you have things on the table that you have to be prepared to take off at a certain point in time when you get a concession or when it's needed to advance things. There's been no concessions, I would point out, but it has advanced to a degree, right? They're still talking. The thing where they made a political mistake and a communications mistake, I would argue, and this is because of the reporting of my colleague Kate McKenna. The Prime Minister was very emphatic on that Friday. I came in off holiday to host because we thought it was a trade deal, but it wasn't. It was the dropping of the counter tariffs. He said, we're matching the U.S. We're getting in alignment with the U.S., which is a defendable posture. But they actually went further than that. And they took a bunch of other tariffs off the table, which they did not tell us about. Now, what we've heard since, though no one has ever said this on the record or even in an on-background statement to the media or from the Prime Minister's mouth directly, the cost of administering those remaining tariffs would have been more expensive than what you'd get. So the juice wasn't worth the squeeze. And, our argument is that the U.S. tariffs are a tax on American consumers that they pay. Why are we going to have administratively cumbersome tariffs on Canadian consumers and importers? That is a tax on our people, and just compound the damage. You should explain that maybe if that's what you're doing. They didn't. So that's where they get into trouble. So there is this, as things evolve, there is a bit of a growing opacity, is that the way you say it? And a lack of transparency and an information vacuum on some of the motivation and exactly and where the state of things are. So this kind of silly conversation becomes about, it's like a fire severity index for forest fires of like moving the needle. Where's the elbow? Is it all the way up? Is it all the way down? Is it broken? Has it been surgically removed? It's kind of silly given the stakes. And that's, I kind of try to move past it and focus on, not the odds of what's happening, but the stakes of what is happening. I think that's more important. But I think we could all do, and the premiers are starting to say this too, as are the stakeholders, with a little bit more explanation of what it is they're hearing from the Americans on their end goals, because Howard Lutnick's doing this and people are breaking Chatham House rules to tell us about it, and what it is Canada's expectations are evolving on, because it's a lot of adjectives and not a lot of nouns,
Totally.
I want to talk about the premiers, because even this week you've had so many of them on the show and you've been able to ask them the questions that we're all wishing we could ask them about the current state of the Federation. I mean, the Canada-US relationship is one thing, but something that Carney talked a lot about after he was elected Prime Minister in April was investing in Canada. And now we're seeing divisions amongst provinces all trying to vie for their own political positions. I'm referring to specifically my premier, David Eby, who has been very vocal this week about a potential pipeline from Alberta. You spoke to David Eby, you spoke to Danielle Smith, you spoke to Wab Kinew. I'm sure there was others, but what are you feeling in terms of the health of the Federation domestically?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think overall it's pretty good. I do think the sort of the Justice League unity and vibes we saw at the First Minister's table at the first half of the year and right up to Huntsville, that's starting to fray a little bit. Danielle Smith, we speak to her quite frequently. I joked to her once that if she's on the show anymore, we're going to have to get her a union card, because she's almost like a co-host for power and politics. She laughs. It is an interesting dynamic, because we have a very good relationship with her office, right, and with Eby's office in terms of getting them on the show and speaking to them, and they're going sideways, right? She is pushing this pipeline to the coast in the absence of a proponent. I mean, David Eby is not wrong when he says it is a hypothetical pipeline at this point in time. It's an aspirational pipeline, I would call it. I know the government is acting as a proponent, but that's kind of a placeholder thing and a name only. You're going to need the taxpayers of Canada can't build another pipeline. That is a problem. Jason Kenney kind of entered the chat and came off the top rope, calling calling David Eby an ideological zealot from the mud hut wing of the British Columbia NDP, which is quite a turn of phrase.
That's quite a phrase.
Yeah. So that's going to be an issue. And David Eby this week, when he was on the show, made the point that the Alberta Indigenous Relations Minister is calling First Nations on the coast of BC who are opposed to this pipeline, arguing that it's going to happen, and they're pushing to lift the tanker ban. And what David Eby makes a point of is the LNG projects in particular that they're doing in that same area. They only have the social license to do that because of the tanker ban. And, an LNG pipeline and a bitumen pipeline, while they're both fossil fuels, a leak from one is very different than the leak from the other. And, whether it's in the tanker or in the pipe. And so this is the big overriding environmental concern outside of the emissions question. So that feels like a dynamic that is going to get worse. And it is going to potentially, because if it gets beyond the hypothetical phase, put the prime minister and his government in a tight spot, right? Now, he's managed the Danielle Smith relationship quite well. I would argue him and Tim Hodgson, they are showing a flexibility in fossil fuel development that did not exist in the old regime. They're avoiding the sort of the culture war temptations that exist with Alberta sometimes. The book ban. Did you see any Liberal MP or political staffer tweet about that, talk about that, or make it an issue? I am not saying this to criticize the Trudeau administration, but that would have been catnip for them. And they would have been, the only culture war Mark Carney's interested in is changing the culture of the bureaucracy in Ottawa. Right. Exactly. And that's it. He's not worried about that stuff, and he's focusing on the economy. So that's happening, and we'll see where that goes, because that dynamic is going to be tense. But I had Wab Kinew on the show this week, and asked because Doug
biggest fans here.
The most positive political communicator in Canada, I think, right now. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, I go back to when I had him on, and he was pushing through with the landfill search right after he got elected, when everybody said it's too expensive and it won't work. And he boiled it down. He goes, we want to send a message to Manitoba that when you go missing, we come looking. And I was like,
okay. Yes.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
That's it. And that's going to resonate. And they worked at like far below the hyperbolic costs, right? So he has been very much, let's pull together and stay together in this moment. And he's still there. But that day, Doug Ford said, it feels like we're elbows down, to use the elbow metaphor.
Yeah.
And he goes, if the prime minister knows something we don't know, maybe he needs to tell the premiers. And I asked Canoe about that, and he said pretty much the same thing. He pointed to the counter-tariffs being dropped. He pointed to the digital services tax being dropped, which Europe also did. And he goes, what is it we've gotten for these concessions? He goes, because I don't know. I don't see anything. So you're seeing unrest, right? You're seeing anxiety. And this is going on and on and on and on. And I think some of this is a Rorschach test of how you viewed the Carney message to Canadians in the election. Did you view his pitch as, I will defeat Donald Trump in a trade war and get everything back to normal while building this magical, Futurama economy? Or did you view it as, things are going to be really tough, difficult, and complex, and I'm the guy to navigate that? Or are you somewhere in between those two poles?
Right.
And because, the pitch is, you've heard the phrase from Carney, we're going to move at a speed and pace, never thought imaginable. Well, there's how Twitter-brained political operatives view speed and pace. Right. And then how mega projects move.
Right.
A 15-year project getting done in 11 years is a speed and pace thought unimaginable. It's still 11 years, right? It's still 2036. I'm going to be pensioned, and so like it's how you marry your understanding of the language of a corporate executive with experience in financing and building, real hard real estate and economic development projects versus sort of the speed of expectations. And so political cycles, trade cycles, investment cycles, they're never in alignment. They're always out of sync and in competition with each other. And they create pressures at all the different points. And this is a part of the challenge at the First Minister's table and at the cabinet table, right? Because the Prime Minister has done a good job with those tables because, he's been a chairman of a board, complex things. And so that corporate management style in those corporate management environments, it's been successful. There's a lot of activist shareholders, though, in politics that maybe you don't have to deal with at Brookfield Assets Management. First Nations, mayors, premiers,
right.
And that just adds a level of volatility that you can't end a conversation by saying the decision is made, let's move on. You can do that in the corporate world. That doesn't work in politics. So it's not gone yet, but Flavio Volpe is getting frustrated. Lana Payne, president of Unifor, right, stood next to Mark Carney in Kitchener during a campaign event when Donald Trump announced things, saying they're throwing the auto sector under the bus. That's a problem because, Unifor represents auto workers and lumber workers, forestry workers in the softwood areas, in British Columbia in particular, Rachel. She's feeling it in a lot of points. And, them saying the priority areas were steel and aluminum at the White House this week, not mentioning auto, not mentioning lumber. I think they meant that for that meeting, not for Canada. But, it is, people are afraid and need reassurance, and the communications exercise, publicly and privately, might need some fine tuning in addition to the trade negotiation and Donald Trump's strategy.
One of the premiers who has had an enormous platform through this trade war has been Premier Doug Ford. Yes. The Captain Canada label. He has had the mic on a lot of these issues. How do you see that playing out with the rest of the Federation? Do they view him as, the auto sector has been hit so hard, Ontario has been hit so hard, but the other provinces have been hit equally as hard. Do you see that position evolving for whose voice will be the loudest at the table?
Well, he kind of had that platform a little bit by accident and by circumstance because it was Ontario's turn to chair the Council of the Federation, right? The organization of premiers. So, not only is he leading the biggest economy, the biggest province, and the most exposed sectors, it was his job, right?
Right.
So right now, that's the premier of Prince Edward Island, not going to necessarily get the level of attention every day because, the media pool is smaller, the province is smaller. He's not in Toronto. He's going to keep, he ran an early election, maybe a bit opportunistically, on this issue and was rewarded with a significant mandate. But steel, steel, auto, these things, Windsor, Hamilton, Sault Ste. Marie, Oakville, Oxford, in the early days of this, as Daniel Smith does, she finds a way to, insert Alberta into it. It was about Alberta energy and oil and don't you dare, don't you dare. The only industries that have been targeted by name by this administration are fundamentally in Ontario.
Right.
And so they are the bullseye, right, for the Trump agenda. So it's going to be impossible for Doug Ford to kind of slink away. And he wouldn't anyway. So he's going to keep driving that. My concern is, my question is, in the early days of Trump, we saw this scattershot, non-strategic rush by premiers to try to come up with, my idea will magically make this go away. Let's throw Mexico under the bus. Let's militarize the border. Let's do this, And it was just chaos and going to Mar-a-Lago and doing these things. And I'm not criticizing anyone's intentions and stuff here, but it wasn't strategic. And it wasn't, it was a lot of impulse. Mm-hmm. And so if this fraying, because, Ford wants to hit back, he thinks, he's suggesting that Carney's been a little bit too soft on the U.S. here. Eby has a different view. Scott Moe, who has become a very reasonable, moderate voice on things since the election of Carney. His economy caught between, the two powers, China hitting his canola because of EV tariffs that we did to appease the Americans. And if we take down the EV tariffs to satisfy China, what does America then do? And what does that mean for potash? And what does that mean? You're making a king-size bed with queen-size sheets on this issue. There's always an exposed area, no matter what you do. So there's been an evolution of all of the premier's approaches and relationships towards the federal government. It's less of a proxy theater for the federal conservative, federal liberal fight than it has been for the past number of years. But you can see a fraying there. And Ford has the potential to pull it together, I think, to still be that kind of moral leader, even if he's not the leader on paper. But he has tolerance and patience limits as well. And he has a lot of activist shareholders he needs to look after as well. And he's a lot of the critical minerals and some of the energy in this jurisdiction the Americans need. And maybe it serves them for him to be the bad cop to the good cop. But for a country and an administration that started this trade war, the Americans are awfully sensitive about how they're the victims here because we won't put their liquor on shelves and things like this. They seem very hurt as they've cost 80,000 jobs, a lot of them in Ontario. And that's what Ford's got to deal with, right? Like, he's a big Canadian, but he also is the first minister of Ontario. And there's going to be moments when those collide.
He also seems to have done just one quick aside on Ford, which I think is interesting. He seems, at least from the outside, to have been able to do a pretty good job at shoring up other governors, U.S. governors, other U.S. leaders, other U.S. voices to kind of join arm in arm in this. I don't know that we necessarily fully expected that. And I think that, and I don't know how successful that will be, but I think it's interesting that his public relations campaign has worked in several ways, not just on our side of the border, but seemingly on their side as well.
Yes, he is sort of the, I'm not saying this is a criticism to Doug Ford. It's a compliment to his sort of everyman quality, right? He's almost like the mayor of Ontario. He has this municipal politics sensibility and focus on, grassroots Ontarians. He's sort of the perfect avatar to speak to the Trump supporter and to the Trump media world, right? Like, he's the premier you want to put on Fox News, right? Yes. David Eby would have a very different reception. You know what I mean? And that's not a criticism to Eby, but, he's just a different type of politician. So, when I worked at McDonald's as a teenager, they had the expression, put your aces in their places, which means take the person best suited to the task and put them on that task, right?
You have so many of those, David.
Such a Newfoundlander.
Yeah, well, but like when a busload of kids comes into the McDonald's, it's not the time for the trainee to be on the busiest grill, right? You
put your
your
aces
person
in
there.
their places. Is that what it is?
Oh my
I'm gonna
God.
use that every day.
That's the title
but
of this
episode. It's a good organizational philosophy. It's how you should build a cabinet, really. But we don't all the time. So Ford has had that ability, and he shares an ability with Donald Trump, and this is the only way in which I'm comparing them. I want to be very clear.
Yes.
To sort of bottom line an issue.
Yes.
To see, you can get lost in complexity, or you can navigate complexity and just distill it, boil it down to its essence. And this is something Trump is actually really good at in terms of understanding where a public mood is going and where it is, and how to communicate that issue to them to marshal support for it. Ford has shown a lot of that, and he's also shown a willingness to backtrack and apologize, which is a superpower in politics that very few people use. So, yes, a lot of the governors are on side because they're feeling a lot of pain, right? Yeah. Like the border states, the tourism drop is noticeable in a lot of towns. The border states as well, like the integrated manufacturing and supply chains, they're feeling it. So there's a natural coming together of interest there. You just don't see it percolating to the top of the consciousness in the United States. I mean, we're talking about the Epstein files all the time on cable news in the U.S. rather than, the economy of Maine is crashing. It's a little bit too much inside Beltway stuff, but I don't know if it is getting to the top. Going back to the question earlier you asked, Amanda, about how are Americans feeling it. It's there. They see it. The governors see it. The mayors see it. Whether it's there at the national level and the national consciousness, I don't know. When even CNN and MSNBC aren't kind of like covering it at scale, Fox is never really going to cover it at scale. And Newsmax and these places are definitely not going to touch it. Or if they do, it'll be Joe Biden's fault, right? It's the Biden economy, and the Trump economy hasn't taken root yet. So all of that political sport is coming together. It goes back to the, it's five fingers instead of a fist right now. It's not clenched in a way where it can hit something with force and shake things loose. And that's the tipping point moment in this that I think Canadians and those attack sectors are all just waiting for.
David, I want to wrap here because you have a very busy life, and so we don't want to keep you forever. But I'm going to wrap the way that you like to wrap Power and Politics, and that is. Oh no! You have 17 seconds. What is your positive message for Canadians? 17 seconds.
I think if anything, Trump has given an urgency to the internal to-do list that has been a source of frustration for business and political leaders for decades, and it has changed the priorities of the country to work together, to focus on other things. And America, there's been a laziness. It's right there. It speaks English, same laws, common currency. Let's go. This may be the motivation to kind of get the country doing things it needs to do, because we realize now just how vulnerable you are by being so reliant on one option. And you got to look after yourself, because they're not going to look after us even after Trump, because Trumpism is probably going to survive Trump. And we got to be ready for that world, because I agree with the Prime Minister. There's been a rupture. The world we're in is fundamentally changed, and you've got to prepare for that. If it slingshots back, great. But if it doesn't, prepare for that world. So just like you guys, when I give you 17 seconds, I take a minute.
Exactly. Thank you. We appreciate the extra time. All right, David Cochrane, thank you so much for coming and explaining the crazy week that we've had in Canadian politics. We'd love to have you back as this journey continues.
Thanks, gang, and we'll see you soon on my show.
You sure will.
We'll see you soon.
We'll be right back.
Thanks, David.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening. New episodes air every Friday.
Subscribe on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on Instagram and find us at beyondaballot.com.